Okay, I want you to picture one single piece of land. Now, on that same land, imagine two completely different groups, separated by centuries of history, and both are claiming they have a fundamental right to be there. This isn't just some thought experiment, it's the real-life collision of rights that was at the very heart of Australia's landmark Wick decision. And that's what we're going to unpack right now.
And that brings us right to the central question, this huge, high-stakes legal puzzle that honestly challenged the very foundations of property law in Australia. Is it even possible for two different sets of rights, one that's ancient and one that's modern, to occupy the exact same space? This was the core issue the Wick decision had to figure out. So, to really get why the verdict was so huge, we've got to go back and understand the core of the conflict itself. For a long, long time, there was this major legal gray area in Australia, this big, unsettled question that really cut to the heart of the nation's identity and its relationship with the land. And here are the two competing claims. On one side, you've got native title. These are the inherent rights of indigenous peoples tied to literally thousands of years of their own laws and customs. And on the other side, a pastoral lease. Now, this is a formal grant from the government, often for massive areas of land, giving people the right to use it for things like grazing cattle. Two totally different ideas layered right on top of the exact same land. And this, right here, was the million-dollar question. For decades, pretty much everyone just assumed that once the government handed out a pastoral lease, any native title that might have existed there was just gone, extinguished, wiped out forever. But here's the thing. Was that actually legally correct? The truth is, nobody really knew for sure. Well, that kind of deep uncertainty couldn't last forever. And it was the Wick peoples of Cape York in Queensland who finally brought this whole question to a head in a historic legal challenge that had the entire nation watching. So, in 1996, they took their case all the way to the top, to the High Court of Australia. And their argument was incredibly powerful and direct. They said that granting pastoral leases over their traditional lands did not automatically extinguish their native title. The country basically held its breath.
So, the stage was set. It was up to the High Court to make a call that was going to redefine land rights across massive parts of the Australian continent. No pressure, right?
And wow, the decision was incredibly close, a 4-3 split among the 7 judges. That razor-thin margin just goes to show you how ridiculously complex and contentious this issue was, even for the best legal minds in the country. It was a decision on a real knife's edge.
And then came the stunning result. The majority of the court found that actually a pastoral lease and native title were not automatically enemies. They could exist together on the same piece of land. This just completely flipped that old assumption on its head.
And in the court's own words, you can see the key principle. They set an incredibly high bar for wiping out native title. The thinking was, look, when the government created these pastoral leases, it never explicitly said, and by the way, this gets rid of native title. So the court wasn't going to just assume that was the intention unless there was absolutely no other way, unless the two rights were so completely inconsistent, it was physically impossible for them to exist together.
This verdict basically introduced a radical new idea into Australian law, the principle of coexistence. So let's take a second and break down what this new way of thinking actually means out there in the real world.
Coexistence, at its core, is the legal idea that allows these two very different sets of rights to share the same patch of ground. It meant the conversation wasn't an all-or-nothing, you win, I lose kind of situation anymore.
Which, of course, brings up the next logical question, right? It's all well and good to say they can both exist, but what happens when a farmer needs to build a fence right where a traditional ceremony is supposed to happen? Who wins that argument?
And the court laid out a really clear hierarchy to answer that exact question. So, step 1, both rights exist. Step 2, if there's a direct conflict between something the farmer is allowed to do and a native title right, then step 3 is the tiebreaker. In that clash, the rights of the pastoral leaseholder come out on top.
So the bottom line is this. Native title survived, but it wasn't absolute. It could be paused or limited wherever it was inconsistent with the rights of the leaseholder. It basically had to yield when there was a conflict, but crucially, it didn't just disappear.
As you can probably guess, this decision sent absolute shockwaves across the country, and it created an entirely new legal landscape. So let's take a quick look at the immediate aftermath.
The implications were just enormous. All of a sudden, huge pastoral stations, we're talking properties the size of small countries, might also be subject to native title claims.
This wasn't some minor legal adjustment, it was a fundamental shift in how land was understood and managed across a huge part of Australia.
And the political reaction was fast. The court made its ruling in '96, and just 2 years later, in an effort to create some certainty, the federal government passed major changes to the Native Title Act, which were a direct response to the Wick decision.
When you look back at it, the long-term legacy of the Wick case is that it established this powerful legal principle of caution. It sent a really clear message that historical rights like native title can't just be accidentally or easily wiped away with the stroke of a pen. They have to be treated with serious legal respect.
And that leaves us with this profound question that's still with us today, long after the judges made their call. The Wink case gave us a legal answer, sure, but the bigger social and political challenge is still going. How do you find the right balance between acknowledging the deep, deep history of the land and also managing its use for today and for the future? It's a question that countries are still grappling with all over the world.